Caroline. Michael Scott stopped cold on the frozen sidewalk, his heart pounding as he stared at the woman on the park bench. At first, he thought it was just another homeless person trying to survive the December night. But when the streetlight flickered and lit up her face, his stomach dropped. It was her, the woman he'd fired 3 weeks ago. And she wasn't moving. It was late, the kind of late where Seattle's streets go quiet and the cold settles in. Michael had just finished a business dinner, good food, good wine, talk about deals that would make him even richer. His driver texted saying he was stuck in traffic. Michael decided to walk instead of standing around waiting. That's when he saw someone on the bench. He almost kept walking. That's what you do. You see people sleeping rough, and you keep moving, because if you stopped for everyone, you'd never get anywhere. And Michael had gotten very far by not stopping, but something made him slow down. Maybe it was the way she was curled up, trying to stay warm. Maybe it was something he couldn't explain. Maybe God just wouldn't let him walk past. He took a step closer. The streetlight came on, and he saw her face. His chest went tight. Caroline. The woman who'd worked in his home for 2 years. Quiet, steady, until 3 weeks ago when he fired her for being late. Now she was here, lips blue, skin pale, her hands wrapped around something even in sleep. Michael dropped to his knees. Caroline, can you hear me? Nothing. He carefully opened her frozen hands. Inside cash, a thick stack of small bills, and underneath, hospital papers. Patient, Ethan Smith, age 12. Leukemia, insurance terminated, 17 days without treatment. Then he found the letter, handwritten, never sent. I'm not asking for charity, just for my job back. My brother is dying. Michael's hands started shaking. 3 weeks ago, she'd been late, broke something. He told her to leave, never asked why. Now she was here, holding everything she had, and it still wasn't enough. He ripped off his coat, wrapped it around her, and called 911. As the sirens got closer, one thought kept hitting him. She'd been waiting for him, and he'd never looked down. Before we continue, like, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because sometimes God puts someone right in front of us, and we're too blind to see them, until the moment we can't look away. This is that moment. Michael's home was the kind of place that felt more like a museum than somewhere anyone actually lived. Everything had its spot. The floors were spotless. The kitchen counters were bare except for a coffee maker he used every morning at exactly 7 o'clock. No clutter, no mess, no warmth. Just the kind of perfect order that came from having someone else clean up after you. That morning, Michael came downstairs in his suit, phone already in his hand, checking emails before his feet even hit the ground floor. His assistant had sent him the stock numbers. His mind was already running calculations. He walked into the kitchen expecting his coffee to be ready. It wasn't. He frowned and glanced at the clock. 7:03. Caroline. No answer. A minute later, the back door opened, and Caroline came in. She looked exhausted. Her coat was damp, even though it was freezing outside. Her hands were shaking as she set down her bag. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. I'm so sorry, Mr. Scott, she said quietly. The train was late. I tried to get here on time. You're late, Michael said, not looking up from his phone. That's not acceptable. I know, if I could explain. I don't need an explanation, Caroline. You're fired. Get your things and go. Her face went still. No tears. No arguing. She just stood there for a second, then nodded and turned toward the back room where she kept her jacket and shoes. Michael poured himself coffee and sat down at the counter. By the time she came back through with her bag over her shoulder, he'd already moved on to his next email. She didn't say anything, just walked out the side door and closed it quietly behind her. The agency sent someone new that afternoon. She talked too much and didn't know where anything went, but Michael didn't say anything. By the end of the week, he couldn't even remember what day Caroline had left. But Caroline remembered. That morning, she'd come straight from an overnight cleaning shift across town. 11 at night until 6 in the morning, scrubbing floors in an empty office building. She'd barely made the train back, her body screaming for sleep, but she couldn't afford to miss this job too. Not with Ethan's hospital bills piling up. Not with the insurance company sending letters every other day. She'd tried so hard to hold it together, but her hands had been shaking, her vision blurry, and when she reached for something on the top shelf, she'd swayed, just for a second. That's when the vase fell. Now, 3 weeks later, she had no job, no apartment, and her brother had been without treatment for over 2 weeks. But Michael didn't know any of that. He never asked. Michael sat in the hospital waiting room under lights so bright they made his head hurt. His coat was gone, wrapped around Caroline somewhere in the back. His shirt was still damp from kneeling in the snow. People kept staring at him. A man in a $1,000 suit sitting alone at 2 in the morning, looking like he'd just watched his whole life fall apart. He didn't care. He kept reading the hospital papers over and over. Ethan Smith, 12 years old, leukemia. Treatment stopped 17 days ago. A nurse walked past, and he caught part of her conversation with another staff member. Hypothermia, severe malnutrition. She's been living outside for at least a week, maybe more. Michael's stomach turned. The other nurse lowered her voice. There's a kid in our system with the same last name, 12 years old, oncology. Treatment was suspended when the insurance got cut off. How long does he have? Without treatment? Days, maybe a week. Michael stood up so fast the chair scraped across the floor. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and dialed the oncology department. This is Michael Scott. I need to speak to someone about a patient, Ethan Smith. 12 years old. Leukemia. His voice was tight. I'm authorizing whatever he needs. Full treatment. I don't care what it costs. Start tonight. There was a pause on the other end. Sir, that's nearly $500,000. I know what it costs, Michael said. Just do it. He sat back down, his chest tight, and suddenly he wasn't in the hospital anymore. He was 23 again, standing in a different waiting room. His younger brother in a bed down the hall, 14 years old, hooked up to machines. Same diagnosis, same desperate need for treatment they couldn't afford. Michael had just started his first company. He was broke, maxed out every credit card he had, and when the hospital said they needed more money or they'd have to stop, he didn't have it. He remembered his brother asking him, "Are we going to be okay?" And Michael had lied. "Yeah, I'll figure it out." But he didn't figure it out in time. He built an empire after that, told himself he'd never be powerless again, never be too poor to save someone. And yet here he was rich beyond measure, and he'd fired the one person who needed him most. A doctor appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Scott? She's awake. You can see her now." Michael stood, his heart pounding, and wondered if Caroline would even want to look at him. Caroline's eyes opened slowly, like she was fighting her way back from somewhere far away. The room was warm, too warm. Beeping sounds, white walls, the smell of antiseptic. She blinked, trying to remember where she was, and then panic hit her all at once. "Ethan, he's okay." Michael's voice came from beside the bed. She turned her head and saw him sitting there, still in his wrinkled shirt, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "He's stable," Michael said. "Treatment started last night. The doctors say he's responding well." Caroline stared at him. Tears started running down her face before she could stop them. Not relief, not gratitude, something closer to disbelief. "Why?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have a good answer. "Why now?" Caroline said, her voice getting stronger. "You had 3 weeks. I wrote you a letter. I was outside your building for 3 nights. Where were you?" Michael looked down. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "That morning I was late. I'd been up all night working another job to pay for Ethan's medication. I hadn't slept in 2 days. And you didn't ask. You just told me to leave." "I know." "No, you don't." Caroline sat up a little, her voice shaking. "Men like you don't know what it's like. I wasn't late because I overslept. I was late because I was trying to keep my brother alive, and you threw me out like I was nothing." Michael's jaw tightened. He pulled out his laptop and opened it on the edge of her bed. "You're right," he said quietly. "I didn't see you, but I'm seeing now. And what I'm seeing is bigger than just you and Ethan." He turned the screen toward her, rows and rows of data, names, denial codes, dollar amounts. "This is my company's insurance system," he said. "It's been denying claims for 3 years, targeting low-income families, over 18,000 people. Your case isn't the only one, it's part of a pattern." Caroline stared at the screen. Her face went from shock to something harder, colder. You're telling me Ethan almost died because your computer decided we weren't worth the money? Yes. Her hands balled into fists on the blanket. How many others? Michael scrolled down. 43 denials yesterday alone. Caroline closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were filled with something Michael hadn't seen before. Not tears, not fear, rage. You don't get to save my brother and walk away feeling good about yourself, she said. You fix this. All of it. Every single person. Your system hurt you. Fix it. I don't know how. Then you learn. Her voice cut through the room like glass. You have money. You have power. You use it. Because if you don't, Ethan lives, and I spend the rest of my life knowing I was saved, while thousands weren't. She looked him dead in the eyes. Can you live with that? Michael didn't go home that night. Or the next. He spent 2 days in his office pulling files, going through records, tracing every denied claim back to its source. The more he found, the sicker he felt. It wasn't just an algorithm, it was designed, deliberate. The system flagged people based on their zip codes, their income, their medical history. And once you were flagged, every claim you submitted got scrutinized until they found a reason to say no. Caroline's file was there. He found it buried in the employee records. She'd been flagged 2 years ago when Ethan's diagnosis first went into the system. The algorithm had marked her as high-cost dependent risk, and over the next 2 years, it had recommended her termination 6 different times. 6 times, someone had overridden it. Until the vase. Michael's hands were shaking as he kept digging. Then he found the emails. They were from his CFO, Edmund Prescott, sent to the head of the insurance division. Subject line, Q4, cost optimization. Michael opened the first one. We need to reduce dependency payouts by 18% this quarter. Flag all employees with dependents requiring long-term care over $200K annually. Begin phased terminations. The next email was worse. Employee 4738. Termination will save approximately $280K annually on dependent cancer treatment. Approve immediate coverage cessation upon exit. Employee 4738. Caroline. They'd calculated Ethan's death as a line item. Michael sat back in his chair, his chest tight, staring at the screen. He felt like he was going to be sick. A knock on the door made him look up. Caroline stood there, still pale, wearing clothes someone from the hospital must have given her. She wasn't supposed to be out yet. What did you find? She asked. Michael turned the screen toward her. She read the email slowly. Her face didn't change, but her hands started shaking. They knew, she whispered. They all knew. It goes higher than him, Michael said. The board approved these protocols 3 years ago. They've been paid bonuses for every percentage point they cut. Caroline looked at him, and for the first time since she'd woken up, something broke in her expression. My brother almost died so they could get richer? Michael nodded. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, When are you going to confront them? Tomorrow. Emergency board meeting. I'm coming with you. Caroline. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Her voice was steel. They tried to erase me. Tried to erase Ethan. I'm not letting them pretend we were just numbers on a page. She stepped closer, and Michael saw something in her eyes he recognized. The same look he'd had 20 years ago, standing over his brother's grave. I'm not your redemption story, Michael. I'm your reckoning. The conference room on the 38th floor was all glass and steel. 12 board members sat around the table when Michael walked in with Caroline beside him. The room went quiet. Edmund Prescott, the CFO, stood up immediately. Michael, this is a closed board meeting. Miss Smith has no business. Sit down, Edmund. Michael's voice was calm, but it carried weight. He plugged his laptop into the screen at the front of the room. The data filled the wall names, denial rates, demographic breakdowns, profit margins. For 3 years, Michael said, our insurance division has been denying legitimate claims to boost quarterly numbers. The woman standing next to me almost froze to death because of it. Her 12-year-old brother almost died. Board member Thompson leaned back in his chair. Michael, insurance companies have to make difficult decisions. That's the nature of. Her brother has leukemia. Michael cut him off. He's 12 years old, and your system flagged him as too expensive to keep alive. Prescott stood again. This is completely inappropriate. We followed standard actuarial practices. You sent an email, Michael said, pulling it up on the screen. Employee 4,738. You called her a high-cost dependent risk. You calculated how much money the company would save if her brother died. The room went completely silent. Caroline stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but every person in that room heard her. My brother's name is Ethan. He's 12. He likes basketball. He wants to work with animals when he grows up. She paused. Last week, he asked me if dying hurts because he couldn't breathe, and I couldn't afford his medication. One of the board members looked down at the table. Caroline kept going. You see spreadsheets. I see Ethan asking me why I can't save him. Every one of those 18,000 denials is someone's Ethan, someone's mother, someone's child. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. If that's how you do business, then you're in the wrong business. Thompson cleared his throat. This is clearly emotional, but we have shareholders to answer to. We can't just... I'm shutting down the algorithm, Michael said. Today, I'm refunding every wrongly denied claim from the past 3 years, and I'm giving this board a choice: help me fix this, or find another company to run. Prescott's face went red. If you do this, we'll vote you out as CEO. You'll lose everything. Michael looked at Caroline, then back at the board. Then, call the vote. 5 board members stood up and walked out. 7 stayed. Prescott stared at Michael, his jaw tight. You're going to regret this. Maybe, Michael said quietly, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night. Security escorted Prescott out. As the door closed behind him, Caroline turned to Michael. What happens now? Michael looked at the remaining board members, then at the data still glowing on the screen, 18,000 names, waiting for someone to fight for them. Now, he said, we go public. 2 days later, Caroline's letter was everywhere. Someone at the hospital had leaked it to the press. By morning, her face was on every news site, her handwriting, her words. I'm not asking for charity, just for my job back. My brother is dying. Michael's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His PR team was panicking. The board members who'd stayed were now questioning their decision. But then, the other story dropped. Former housekeeper exploits billionaire's guilt for financial gain. It was anonymous, vicious. It said Caroline had planned everything, that she'd manipulated Michael, that Ethan's condition was exaggerated, that she was using a sick child to get rich. Michael found Caroline in the guest room of his house, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. Tears were streaming down her face. They're going to destroy me, she whispered. Michael sat down beside her. No, they're not. You don't understand. She looked at him, and her voice broke. I've spent my whole life being invisible, and now I'm everywhere, and they're making me into a liar. Then we tell the truth, Michael said. Today, press conference, you and me. Caroline shook her head. I can't. Look at me, I'm nobody. Who's going to believe me over them? I will. Michael's voice was steady. And so will everyone who's ever been where you are. She looked at him for a long time. Then, she nodded. The press conference was packed, cameras everywhere, reporters shouting questions before they even reached the podium. Michael spoke first, laid out everything, the algorithm, the denials, the 18,000 people affected. He announced the $500 million settlement fund, the independent oversight, the new patient advocacy board. Then he stepped aside. Caroline stood there, her hands shaking, staring at the wall of cameras. For a second, Michael thought she might walk away, but she didn't. My name is Caroline Smith, she said, her voice quiet at first. I'm 30 years old. I've cleaned houses since I was 18. I raised my brother since I was 23. Her voice got stronger. I worked 3 jobs to keep him alive. I lost my home trying to save him, and I slept on a park bench with everything I owned because I'd already lost everything else. The room went completely still. But I'm not here for sympathy, Caroline said. I'm here because there are millions like me, people who are invisible until they're dying, ignored until they're gone. She looked directly into the cameras. This company's system didn't see my brother's life. It saw a cost, and that has to end. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. To everyone who's been denied, who's been told your family isn't worth saving, who's had to choose between medicine and food, I see you, we see you, and we're not stopping until this is fixed. Outside, through the windows, Michael could see a crowd gathering. people holding signs, pictures of loved ones, names of people lost. Caroline's words had found them, and they weren't going to let her stand alone. That night, Caroline didn't say much. Michael drove her to the hospital in silence. She stared out the window the whole way, her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. When they pulled up, she didn't move right away. "What if he's angry?" she said quietly. Michael looked at her. "Why would he be angry?" "Because I left him." Her voice broke. "I was so busy trying to save him that I wasn't there. He's been in that hospital room alone, and I was sleeping outside on a bench. You were fighting for his life. But he didn't know that." She wiped her eyes. "What if he thinks I abandoned him?" Michael didn't have an answer for that. They walked through the hospital together. Caroline's steps got slower the closer they got to the pediatric oncology floor. By the time they reached Ethan's room, she'd stopped completely. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Michael said gently. Caroline took a breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. Ethan was sitting up in bed, thinner than Michael expected, a medical mask covering half his face. But his eyes lit up the second he saw her. "Caroline!" She crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped her arms around him, careful not to disturb the IV lines. She was crying so hard she couldn't speak. "I thought something happened to you," Ethan said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "They wouldn't tell me where you were." "I'm okay," Caroline whispered. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." Michael stayed by the door, watching them. He felt like he was intruding on something sacred. After a while, Ethan looked over at him. "Who's that?" Caroline pulled back and wiped her face. "That's Michael. He's the one who made sure you got your treatment." Ethan studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "You're the one who fired her." Michael's chest tightened. "I am, but you helped me." "Your sister helped you," Michael said. "I just finally learned to pay attention." Ethan looked between them, trying to understand. "Are you fixing it? For the other kids too?" Michael nodded. "We're trying." "Good." Ethan leaned back against his pillows, tired but more alive than he'd been in weeks. "Because it's not fair. Kids shouldn't have to worry about stuff like this." Caroline kissed his forehead. "No, they shouldn't." As they left the hospital later, Caroline was quiet again. But this time, it was different. This time, there was something like hope in her silence. "He looks stronger," Michael said. "He is." Caroline stopped walking and turned to face him. "The doctors said he's responding to the treatment. They think he's going to make it." Her voice cracked on the last word. Michael didn't say anything. He just stood there with her while she cried, not from grief this time, but from relief so overwhelming it hurt. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear. "What happens next?" she asked. Michael thought about the 18,000 names still waiting, the federal investigation that had just been launched, the lawsuits already being filed. "Now," he said, "we finish what we started." 2 months later, everything looked different. The federal investigation was moving forward. Checks were going out to families who'd been denied. The algorithm had been shut down completely, and Caroline's face was no longer on the news, at least not as a victim. Now she was something else. Michael found her in what used to be an empty office on the 15th floor. Now it was filled with phones, computers, and people, most of them former patients or family members who'd been through what she'd been through. "How many today?" he asked. 37 calls, Caroline said, looking up from her desk. 12 we were able to help immediately. The rest we're still working on. She looked tired, but different, stronger, like she'd found something she didn't know she was looking for. "The board approved your title," Michael said. "Director of Patient Advocacy. It's official." Caroline smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I never thought I'd have a title. You've earned it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The doctor called this morning." Michael's heart stopped. "And?" Ethan's latest scans came back clean. Her voice broke. "He's in remission." Michael felt something release in his chest, something he didn't know he'd been holding. "Caroline, that's—" "I know." She stood up, tears streaming down her face. "I know." They stood there in that small office, and for the first time since that night on the bench, Caroline looked like she could finally breathe. "He wants to meet you," she said. "Really meet you, not in a hospital room." The next day, Caroline brought Ethan to the office. He was thinner than other kids his age, his hair still growing back in patches, but he was smiling, really smiling. Michael met them in the lobby. "Hi," Ethan said, extending his hand. Michael shook it carefully. "Hi, Ethan. It's good to see you." Ethan looked around at the building, then back at Michael. "My sister says you're trying to help other kids like me." "We are. Can I help too?" Michael glanced at Caroline, then back at Ethan. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to tell people what it's like," Ethan said. "Being sick, being scared. Maybe if they hear it from a kid, they'll understand why it matters." Caroline's hand went to her mouth. Michael knelt down to Ethan's level. "I think that's exactly what people need to hear." That night, Michael sat in his office long after everyone had gone home. He was thinking about a boy who wanted to turn his pain into purpose, about a woman who'd refused to stay invisible, about how many lives could change if people just stopped long enough to see each other. His phone buzzed. A message from Caroline. "Foundation Gala is in 2 weeks. Ethan wants to speak. Are you ready for this?" Michael stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, "Let's show them what redemption looks like." The ballroom was full. Donors, advocates, families, press, people who'd been helped by the foundation, people who were still fighting. Michael stood backstage, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. Caroline was beside him in a simple dress, looking more nervous than she'd been at the press conference. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just thinking about how different everything is." "Good different?" "Yeah," she smiled. "Good different." Then Ethan appeared, wearing a suit that was slightly too big for him, his hair fully grown back now, no mask covering his face. "I'm ready," he said. Caroline knelt down and straightened his collar. "You don't have to do this, if you don't want to." "I know," Ethan said, "but I want people to understand. I want them to know it's not just about money. It's about being seen." The lights dimmed. Someone called Ethan's name. He walked onto that stage like he'd been doing it his whole life. "My name is Ethan Smith," he said into the microphone. "I'm 13 years old. 6 months ago, I was dying because a system decided I wasn't worth saving." The room went completely silent. "But my sister didn't accept that." His voice was steady. "She lost everything trying to save me. Her job, her home, almost her life." He paused. "And when she woke up in that hospital, she didn't just save me. She decided to save everyone." People were crying. Michael could see it from the wings. Ethan kept going. "I'm standing here tonight because someone finally stopped. Someone finally looked. And I think that's what God does. He puts people in front of us when we're not paying attention, and he keeps putting them there until we finally see." Caroline was sobbing quietly beside Michael. Ethan finished simply, "My sister taught me that being strong isn't about not breaking. It's about getting back up when you do. So, thank you for getting back up. For all of us." The applause shook the room. Later, after the speeches and the photos and the champagne, Michael found Caroline on the rooftop terrace, looking out at the city. "You good?" he asked. She nodded. "Just thinking about that bench, how close we came. What stopped you from giving up?" "Ethan," she smiled softly. "The day before I ended up there, he told me, 'You're the strongest person I know. You don't quit.' So I didn't." Michael was quiet. "I walk past that bench sometimes. I think about how different everything would be if I'd left the restaurant 5 minutes earlier, or later." "But you didn't," Caroline said, turning to face him. "You were exactly on time. Maybe that's how grace works. It shows up in a coat you didn't expect, in the middle of the worst moment of your life." "I don't feel like grace." "Grace never does," she said. "It just shows up and does the work." They stood there, watching the city lights. Somewhere below, families were getting checks they'd been waiting for. Treatments were being approved. Children were getting to dream again. Caroline's voice was soft. "We weren't rescued, Michael. We were seen. And once you've been truly seen, you can never be invisible again." Michael thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, walking past people, building empires, never looking down. And he thought about the man he was now. "Thank you," he said quietly. Caroline smiled. "For what?" "For not giving up, for showing me what I'd stopped seeing." She reached out and squeezed his hand once. We saved each other. And standing there, above a city that had once ignored them both, Michael understood something he'd spent his whole life missing. Sometimes the people you save end up saving you right back. And sometimes that's exactly how God planned it all along.